for Women's Scotland Supreme Court ruling, Minister for Women and Equalities, Bridget Phillipson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With permission, I will now make a statement to update the House on the Supreme Court judgment in the case for Women Scotland Limited versus the Scottish Ministers. This ruling brings welcome clarity and confidence for women and service providers. Single-sex spaces must be protected. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is personal to me. Before I was elected to this place, I ran a women's refuge in the North East for women and children fleeing domestic violence. I know how important it is, and always was to survivors, to have single-sex spaces based on biology, places of safety after trauma, time in a sanctuary which allowed them therapeutic support, healing from unimaginable male violence and fear. I remember, Madam Deputy Speaker, how hard countless campaigners had to fight over many decades to get any single-sex provision at all, to create women's refuges and to create rape crisis centres. And then later I remember how hard it was to convince commissioners that young homeless women trying to heal from terrifying acts of cruelty shouldn't be left in mixed-sex accommodation. I will continue to fight for that provision to ensure that women's safety, women's privacy and women's dignity is always protected. This government will continue as before, working to protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex, now with the added clarity of this ruling. And we will continue our wider work with commitment, with compassion, to protect all of those who need it right across society. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a government that will support the rights of women and trans people, now and always. This is a government that will support the rights of all people with protected characteristics, now and always. This is a government that will support the rights of our most vulnerable, now and always. And on that, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no change to announce. Dignity and respect for all, now and always. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a judgment long in the making. It began in 2018, when Scottish ministers issued guidance on the definition of a woman in the eyes of the Gender Representation on Public Boards Act. That guidance stated that a woman in that Act bears the same meaning as a woman in the Equality Act 2010 and included trans women with a gender recognition certificate. For Women Scotland challenged this guidance, saying that sex in the Equality Act means biological sex, so that a trans woman with a gender recognition certificate is a man for the purposes of the Act. The case was appealed to the Supreme Court, and last week the court ruled that sex in the Equality Act means biological sex. This means that a person will be considered as their biological sex for the purposes of the Equality Act, regardless of whether or not they have a gender recognition certificate. I know that the women who brought this challenge have not always been treated with the respect that they deserve. And this government believes in freedom of speech, and we believe in the fundamental right to protest. But in no way does that extend to criminal damage. There can be no excuse for defaced statues of feminist icons, no excuse for threats, no excuse for harassment. Madam Deputy Speaker, such acts seek to drag down the debate away from common sense, away from the sensible view held by the majority of the British public that women need single-sex spaces, that those spaces should be protected, and that you can protect those spaces while treating trans people with respect as well. So the certainty that this judgment brings is welcome. And now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is time to move forward. There's now a need to ensure that this ruling is clear across a range of settings, from healthcare and prisons to sport and single-sex support groups. The Equality and Human Rights Commission, as Britain's equality regulator, is working quickly to issue an updated statutory code of practice to reflect this judgment, and I look forward to reviewing that code of practice in due course. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, alongside these updates, our work to protect single-sex spaces across society continues in earnest. Because for far too long, under the Conservative government, single-sex spaces were anything but, and nowhere is that clearer than in our hospitals. Year after year, the party opposite pledged to close mixed-sex wards, and yet year after year their use not only persisted, it grew massively. And year after year, often in their most vulnerable moments, women were denied the privacy and the dignity that they deserved. Time after time, Conservative ministers, including the now leader of the opposition, came to this House and toured television studios telling the public that they were protecting single-sex spaces in our hospitals. Madam Deputy Speaker, the truth was very, very different, because as last year's data tells us, the use of mixed-sex wards rose by over 2,200%, 2,200% in 10 years under the last Tory government. There is no better example of this, of rhetoric divorced from reality, of a party playing politics with the safety of women, and we will never let them forget it. Madam Deputy Speaker, by contrast, this government will protect women's wards, and NHS England will soon publish guidance on how trans patients should be accommodated in clinical settings, and we will end the practice of mixed-sex wards once and for all. It is not just in our NHS that we will act on behalf of women. In prisons, we will continue to protect women's safety with single-sex accommodation. In women's sport, I've always backed integrity and fairness. Biology matters for competitive sport, and sporting bodies have issued rules to reflect this. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in our prisons, in our hospitals, in sport, in a whole host of other spaces, what was true before the ruling remains true after the ruling. This government protects safe spaces for women under the Equality Act 2010. And for too many years, we've seen the heat dialed up on this debate by the party opposite, with no real action to protect women's spaces. While the use of mixed-sex wards increased under their watch, while an epidemic of violence against women and girls spread across the country, while women's health was neglected, this Labour government will deliver for women through our plan for change, driving down waiting lists month after month, tackling misogyny throughout society, and once and for all, delivering justice for survivors of violence against women and girls. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know as well that many trans people will be worried in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling. So I want to provide reassurance here and now that trans people will continue to be protected. We will deliver a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices. We will work to equalise all existing strands of hate crime. And we will review adult gender identity services so that all trans people get the high-quality care that they deserve. The laws to protect trans people from discrimination and harassment will remain in place, and trans people will still be protected on the basis of gender reassignment, a protected characteristic written into Labour's Equality Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government will offer trans people the dignity that too often they were denied by the party opposite. Too often, a convenient punch bag. Too often, the butt of jokes made in this place by the party opposite, culminating rather shamefully in the previous Prime Minister standing at this dispatch box trying to score cheap laughs from his backbenchers at the expense of vulnerable people. By contrast, Madam Deputy Speaker, this government is clear. Trans people deserve safety, they deserve opportunity, and they deserve respect. Madam Deputy Speaker, this verdict is about clarity and coherence in the eyes of the law. But the Supreme Court judges delivered, along with that verdict, a vital reminder. This isn't about the triumph of one group at the expense of another. It's not about winners or losers. It's not about us or them. And that is the message that I want to reinforce here today in this House. Everyone in our society deserves dignity and respect. Those values are not and never will be a zero-sum battle. Dignity and respect for all. Those are the values that lift us up and set us free. Those are the values that define and